On a quiet morning in 1948, on a beach in southern Australia, the body of a well-dressed man was found leaning against a seawall, staring out at the ocean. He had no wallet, no identification, and no name. Every label had been cut from his clothing, and what investigators eventually found hidden on him would launch one of the strangest unsolved mysteries in history. More than 70 years later, we are only now beginning to learn who he was, but how he died and why may never be fully explained. This is the story of the Somerton Man. It was the first day of December 1948 on Somerton Beach near the city of Adelaide. Early risers noticed a man lying in the sand, propped against the wall, seemingly asleep. But he did not move. When they returned and looked closer, they realized the truth. The man was dead, and there was not a mark of violence on him. He was well built, in his 40s, dressed in a smart suit and polished shoes despite the summer heat. He looked like a man who had simply sat down to rest and quietly slipped away. When the police searched him, they found the ordinary contents of a life: a comb, some chewing gum, cigarettes, a used bus ticket, and an unused train ticket. But no wallet, no papers, and no name. Stranger still, every single clothing label had been carefully removed. Someone had gone to deliberate lengths to make sure this man could never be identified. An autopsy deepened the mystery. His organs were congested, and there were signs pointing to poison. But no poison could be found in his body by any test available at the time. The pathologist was convinced the man had been poisoned by a rare substance, one that breaks down quickly and leaves no trace. But he could not prove it. The cause of death was, officially, unknown. And so began the effort to give the man a name. His fingerprints were taken and sent around the world. His photograph was circulated everywhere. Nothing matched. It was as if he had never existed. People came forward to identify him, certain he was a missing husband, a lost brother, a vanished friend. One by one, every identification collapsed. The man on the beach remained a stranger to the world. Then, months later, came a discovery that transformed the case. A suitcase was found in the checked luggage of the Adelaide railway station, unclaimed. Inside were clothes and tools that matched the dead man. But once again, nearly every name label had been removed. Someone had erased this man's identity with obsessive care. There were a few tantalizing exceptions. A handful of items bore a name, or part of one. A name that would haunt investigators for decades because no matching person could ever be found. The suitcase also held unusual items, a specialized tool and thread of a rare type that had been used to repair his clothing, the same rare thread found in the pockets of the body. But the greatest twist was still hidden. Months after the death, a doctor re-examined the man's clothing and found a tiny pocket sewn into the waistband of his trousers that everyone had missed. Inside that secret pocket was a small, tightly rolled scrap of paper. On it were printed just 2 words: Tamám Shud. The phrase was traced to a book of ancient Persian poetry, the Rubaiyat of Omar Khayyam, and the words carried a chilling meaning. They meant simply, "It is ended," or "It is finished." It was the final phrase of the entire book, the very last line. Torn out, rolled up, and hidden in a dead man's clothing. A message, it seemed. But a message about what? Now the police had a new mission: find the exact book the scrap had been torn from. It was a strange needle in an enormous haystack, and against all odds, it was found. A man came forward. He had discovered a rare copy of the Rubaiyat tossed into the back seat of his unlocked car, parked near the beach, around the time of the death. He had no idea how it got there. When police examined the book, the last page was torn. The missing piece matched the scrap from the secret pocket exactly. This was the book, but the book held even more secrets. Faintly penciled inside the back cover were lines of jumbled capital letters, rows of seemingly random text that looked, for all the world, like a code. To many, it appeared to be a cipher, a secret message, perhaps the key to the whole mystery. Code breakers were brought in, military intelligence took an interest, and for more than 70 years, some of the finest cryptographic minds in the world have tried to crack it. To this day, no one has ever agreed on what, if anything, it means. The book held one more clue. Also penciled inside was a telephone number, and that number led investigators to a young woman who lived just a short walk from Somerton Beach. She was a nurse. When she was shown a plaster cast of the dead man's face, witnesses said she seemed shaken, on the verge of collapse, as though she recognized him. But she insisted she did not know who he was. She gave the police almost nothing, and she carried whatever she knew with a quiet firmness for the rest of her life. There was one more strange connection. Years earlier, this same nurse had owned a copy of that very same rare book of poetry and had given it away to a man she knew during the war. That man was later found alive and well, so the copy in the case was not his, which meant there was another book, another connection, hovering just out of reach of the investigators. The coincidences piled higher and higher. The nurse's evident distress, her link to the exact book, her home so close to where the body was found, and yet she never explained any of it. All of this fed a powerful theory that has surrounded the case ever since, the theory that the Somerton Man was a spy. The timing fit perfectly. It was 1948, the dawn of the Cold War, and not far from Adelaide lay a top-secret weapons testing range, one of the most sensitive military sites in the country. A well-dressed, unidentifiable man, poisoned by a substance that leaves no trace, carrying a hidden coded message dead near a site of enormous strategic importance. To many it looked like espionage. Perhaps he was an agent who had been silenced. Perhaps the code was a message to or from a handler. Perhaps the removed labels were standard practice to protect a spy's identity. But there was another, quieter theory, a story not of nations and secrets, but of a single human heart. Some believed the answer lay with the nurse, that the Somerton Man had come to Adelaide to find her, and that the last line of the poem, "It is ended," was not a spy's code at all, but the final words of a broken love story. For decades, these two explanations pulled against each other, the Cold War spy and the heartbroken traveler, and with no name for the man, there was no way to know which, if either, was true. The nurse eventually died, taking her secrets with her. Those who wanted answers were left with a single, immovable obstacle. Until the man himself had a name, everything remained a guess. And for over 70 years, that name stayed hidden. The Somerton Man was buried under a headstone that simply called him the Unknown Man. But the story was not finished, because a determined researcher refused to let it rest, and modern science had finally caught up with the mystery. Using hairs preserved from the original plaster cast of the man's face, scientists were able to extract fragments of his DNA, genetic material almost 80 years old. By comparing that DNA to vast public genealogy databases, they slowly, painstakingly built a family tree, tracing the branches back toward the man on the beach. And at last, the researchers announced a name. A man, they believed, born in the early 20th century, an electrical engineer and musician who had vanished from records and been mourned as a stranger for generations. If they are right, the great mystery of who is finally quietly solved. The man on the beach was not a phantom. He was a person, with a family, a job, and a life. But identifying him only sharpened the deeper questions. Because the new name did not obviously fit the spy theory, nor did it cleanly explain the nurse's distress. Why were the labels cut from his clothes? Why the poison that left no trace? What was the coded message in the back of the book? And what truly connected him to that woman by the sea? Those answers remain locked away. Giving the man a name told us who he was, but not why he died, or what he was doing on that beach with the last line of a poem sewn into his clothes. Perhaps he was a spy, caught in the machinery of the Cold War. Perhaps he was a man who crossed the world for a love that ended in silence. Perhaps he was both. The Somerton Man finally has a name again, but the secret he carried to that quiet beach, printed in 2 words meaning "it is ended," may have ended with him forever.